Yo, so I've recently finished Code Vein, my first playthrough. Some of it was live, twitch.tv/memoryleak. Even though, not really streaming much at the moment, but still, there's a plug. I didn't have any prior knowledge related to anything about the game. Streams, reviews, seen none of those. And it presented me with a borderline unique, to me, opportunity to talk about some actual initial-ish thoughts on a new-ish video game, as opposed to, over and over regurgitating same points about a few old games I think are so good I'm basically not even remotely interested in touching pretty much anything else, as is tradition with me. So yeah, hey, here's kind of a new video game I can actually talk about. This is going to be by far the longest scripted video I've done, mostly because the topic of non-FromSoft Souls-like is so interesting to me. We have so many now, yet most of them either, while doing certain things right, still have some deadly flaws, Neo, or just outright suck, everything else. In fact, even FromSoft themselves seem to be unable, somewhat, to produce a good Souls-like anymore. For some reason, nowadays it seems like every developer that gets provided with the chance to make a game inspired by Souls, and yes, it is a privilege to make an actual AAA video game. Most developers can't just decide to make a Souls game. It seems like every developer who's tasked to do a Souls-like is always the wrong person for the job, They always seem to completely misunderstand what was good about Demons and Dark One. Well, the main reason is probably that most developers, especially Western ones, believe it or not, aren't really hardcore into gaming. I mean, just take a look at what is popular in your country. So the only thing about Souls they know is that, those games are dark and difficult. And obviously, even that one thing is not true. Okay, two things, right? Dark and difficult. But the difficulty thing is completely untrue. You probably know that. Those games are only hard if you've never played a real video game before and all you know how to do is just walking forward and mashing attack button. So, since this video is really long, let me give you a short version. I like Code Vein. In fact, I like it even better than Neo, despite the fact that Neo has a much better combat system. I definitely recommend it to all fans of the genre. If you don't like Souls combat, the game is probably not for you because the rest of it, story, graphics, aesthetics, is unfortunately nothing special. I really like only one location, and it's the last one. Well, the rest of them are alright, but yeah, only one I really liked. The story, while not without its moments, due to all the moments it absolutely sucks, could have easily just not been there at all, honestly. This can be considered a review, just bear in mind that I've only played through the game once, so unlike with every other Souls-like, I cannot answer yet if Souls Vein, if Code Vein has much replay value. I can definitely say it has some, just like I, for example, was able to determine I'm definitely not playing any more Neo after finishing it once. Streaming, yes, maybe, but for myself, yeah, I'm definitely not playing much of Neo ever. Well, the first one, I mean. So, if I am saying Code Vein has at least some replayability, I'm pretty sure it's going to be true for you as well, provided you like the genre to begin with. So far, I definitely feel like doing New Game Plus at least once. Anymore? Really not sure, but I don't think it's a bad thing at all, in fact. A lot of my favorite games ever don't really have much replayability. Playing something through only once every couple years obviously doesn't count. I mean, Demon Souls or Dark One, Bayonetta, Biohazard 4 kind of basically infinite replayability. Also, I already started a New Game Plus, and I can already say it starts very easy. You're very overpowered at the beginning of New Game Plus, just like in any other Souls game, pretty much. And just like in any Souls game, by the time you get to New Game Plus, you pretty much cannot upgrade your character much higher. So if the difficulty keeps slowly rising, at some point, I guess, it'll start getting pretty hard. Again, like in any Souls game. It also gives you the option to start a New Game Plus without increasing the difficulty, so it's not even New Game Plus really, basically just a new game, but with your upgraded character. I don't really see the point in that option, but hey, it's there. And once you start a proper New Game Plus, the game still leaves you the option to roll the difficulty back to the normal, like default difficulty, pretty much anytime you want. If you do, I don't know if you can return to New Game Plus difficulty. So yeah, it was probably added because later in the game, enemies, I assume, essentially become over-leveled and you under-leveled, and they start one-shotting your ass. And you obviously don't really have many ways left to make yourself stronger. So, because you are already at all kinds of soft and even hard, maybe, caps. So, you're provided the option to make the game easier when that happens. I imagine you can redo your build in a more defensive way, maybe, in order to compensate for the difficulty. Or maybe actually learn how to play. I don't know how it's gonna play out, but I'm looking forward to, well, checking it out. Okay, so you probably know the basics. Code Vein is a Souls-like made by Shift, the developers of the highly overrated God Eater series and the criminally forgotten best hunting game ever, including all of the Monster Hunters, called Freedom Wars, which also happened to be one of my favorite games ever. I don't give two fucks about God Eater though, sorry, but neither should you, I think. And I don't know a terrible lot about it. I played a little bit of 1 and 2, but never finished either of those. Just in general, if you want something anime, something Japanese, don't obsess over subpar product just because it's from Japan. I mean, come on. Stick your head into what is actually happening in Japan and not into what is being exported for quality-blind weebs. There's some actually great stuff out there, just don't waste your time on garbage no one in Japan even knows exists. God Eater sucks, and it's only popular in the West because it's from Japan. And that discussion. Did I do good? Can I please get an angry weeb mob in my comments? I could really use any kind of exposure. World design-wise, Code Vein is closer to Dark 3, which is to say it's pretty much completely linear, but with occasional choice between, doing one linear dead-end location before the other. But not even that sometimes. There's one instance where the game literally makes itself more linear than it could have been. It puts you in front of 2 very special doors. Behind them are dead-end locations and says, ooh, you can open these now. You have the special ability to open these special doors. But actually, you can only go through one. The path behind the other is blocked 10 meters in by story progression. What the hell, right? What was even the point of getting the ability to open these doors? They could have just opened automatically, in accordance with the story progression. Jeez. I mean, think about your design, right? Things should have purpose. There is no purpose. Ask yourself, why are you wasting your time and money putting certain things in? The world doesn't fork at all, so it's not even Dark 2 kind of situation. And there's no Dark 1 and Bloodborne, Metroidvania-style intersections, between levels, between locations. I guess the previous 2 sentences also stated pretty much everything there is to say about the level design. Well, okay, not everything, but I'll talk about it later. I'm gonna start with something that is very unique to Code Vein as a Souls-like. It has a story. Not a fake one like Nioh, like an actual real story. So let's maybe talk about it a little. The biggest problem with the story is that it tells and never shows. Almost never shows. 50% of the story is literally just characters talking about themselves in ridiculously overdramatically written, overacted, never interrupted even, monologues that are so bad and unrealistic in terms of storytelling and of just simply how humans interact. I quickly started finding pretty much all of them comedic, or, in fact, just annoying. Take Yakumo, for example. Literally every time the dude opens his mouth, he ends up talking about himself for 10 minutes straight. Realistically, no one would have been friends with him in any kind of setting. The rest of the cast is not far behind. The dude without depth perception, I'm forgetting his name, it's Louis or Luis, is definitely a close second psychopath on your team. The other 50% of the story are exposition dumps and some actual story happening in real time. The balance is probably about 1-to-1. And also half of the dumps are basically optional content. Not really, but in a way, yeah, they are. Not even in a way, yeah, pretty much. Nonetheless, optional or not, most of the dumps tell very little about the world and its whatever, like overall narrative, and chiefly just provide background information for various quote-unquote tragic characters, most of whom are already dead and don't play any part in the real ongoing story, even retroactively. They were just like friends of the actual story characters and didn't really do much other than suffer horribly before dying for nothing, and with that, providing Yakumo with an extra opportunity to talk about himself some more. As if he ever waits for, like, right opportunities. Gameplay-wise, the exposition dumps are walking sequences where you're shown some static imagery while listening to a radio drama. You're always in the same looking dreamlike stage during it, so all the dumps look pretty much identical, with the very few exceptions. So, like, not all of them look identical. There's actually a bit of variation with some of them, with like some very special ones, but 99% of them are pretty much look absolutely the same. There are several dozen of them in the game, like I don't know how many, 50? Probably. Definitely, yeah, there's a lot. I don't think there's 100, but 50 probably. And they get old fast. Luckily, while technically you're in control of your character, and most developers would have called it gameplay, you can actually skip those sequences, even on your first playthrough. That is borderline revolutionary, I think. I mean, no jokes though, like, shift, thank you. Also, what doesn't help is that all of the dumps happen to the same looped music track, which was probably a budget-based decision, I don't know, because with the only exception of like the very first exposition dump, I think, that music track is completely tone deaf for the entire rest of them. It's this like sweet, nostalgic, like looking back on good old memories type of piece of music. And it plays over the most horrible, miserable, and a lot of time like actively intense memories of like a given character. It's completely out of place most of the time, and the results aren't even funny really, just tone deaf. Bad. Now that I think of it, I guess there are actually at least 2 tracks, and probably like a couple slightly different arrangements, variations for each. Trust me, that doesn't change my point much. Also, audio mixing is shite during the exposition dumps. The dynamic range is pretty aggressive for the music tracks. Some parts are quieter, some are louder, and when it starts blasting, you can barely hear the voice actors. So subtitles are a must. The cutscenes are not half bad, they are nicely directed, and unlike the exposition dumps, have actual music score, which, by the way, is not bad at all. The game is actually overly quiet, I think. There's very little in terms of ambient sound, and the hub area doesn't even have music, for example, which is very unlike Souls. However, when it does kick in, the music, it's usually pretty good to pretty awesome. It's no Freedom Wars, of course, not even close, but still quite refreshing compared to most other games these days. This would be a good place to add that when the characters are not going on and on about themselves, essentially telling us what kind of character they are instead of, acting it, the voice acting is actually pretty decent, even including the never-ending talking all available partners do when you, run around with them in the world as your summons, essentially. Unfortunately, it is it is programmed so that they pretty much literally never shut up, on top of which it'll probably jump scare you a few times when they start talking, all of a sudden, and the game is kind of quiet. All of a sudden they basically start yelling in your ear something just like, oh wow, look at this place, ooh, interesting. Yeah, that jump scared me, probably at least twice. So, I don't know. Now, you'll probably end up turning it off. It's also just, on its own, it's kind of annoying. Because, they never shut up. Luckily, there is an option to do exactly that. which too can be considered incredible forward thinking by Shift, I think. Most developers would have just, oh, you can, in audio options, you can, make the dialogue quieter. No, there's like an actual option to shut your partner up. Combined with the dumps, the story is far from the worst thing in the world, even though it's pretty hard not to laugh at it being also blood-centered. I mean, Code Vein is a Souls-like, right? And it's all about blood. Pretty much. You get what is, well, stupid about it, right? And yeah, I know, blood is a very popular thing in Japan. Blood-type related shenanigans is basically like astrology in Japan. Only with even wider interest. Trust me, I know. But still, you're not making any kind of game. You're making a Souls-like, and you decide to literally build your aesthetic around blood. Even more so than Bloodborne, I want to add. Wow, okay, well, what can I say? Creative? I don't know if I can talk about the story without going into spoilers, because it's pretty convoluted, and only makes sense really when you put it all together, which kind of happens about halfway through the game. Maybe mute the video until the word spoilers is off the screen or something. I don't know, I'll think of something. Probably that, what I just said. Basically, the story is that the military, or like whatever, science, came up with some kind of BS that was supposed to benefit mankind, I suppose. Instead, it basically unleashed the undead curse. Pretty much literally. Then they've created the super ultra 100% immortal undead, because the undead in Code Vein aren't actually all that immortal, but they kind of are. So they've created like a super undead out of a little girl who was supposed to essentially become the queen of the undead and get the Hollows under control, because the Hollows are the actual problem. The undead themselves are, well, like normal people really, just with superpowers. So, her mission was to get them under control and make them, stop destroying everything. Who would have thunk? She went hollow herself, and now you have the world-ending boss, essentially, in charge of the army of hollows. So the undead got together and managed to kill her, but she's immortal, and whatever you do to her, she will come back. So they took out her, well, if you played Biohazard 4, dominant plaga, essentially. Yeah, they split it into like several, essentially Lord souls, and put those souls into some exceptionally sturdy undead. Apparently, if you don't put it into somebody, the pieces will just regenerate into a monster over and over again, no matter how many times you kill it. And apparently, instead of just sealing those monsters away somewhere in a bunker, or shooting them into effing space, it's easier to just put them into people, well, undead, that eventually go hollow. And you need to kill them every couple years or something and find like new ones to take their places. Apparently that's a better solution. Also, all that happens in the God Eater world and the story area is isolated from the rest of the world by the all-consuming fog from Demon Souls, only it's red now. That was actually put there intentionally to protect the Lord Souls from the God Eater monsters. If those were to get to them, it probably would have been the end of the world for good. Okay, so the undead here are actually called revenants, I think. And they're technically vampires, but they still function just like the undead from Dark Souls. If they die, they respawn at their last bonfire, unless they get hit in the heart, by the way, in which case it's permadeath, but not for the Lord Souls owners. Those are practically immortal unless you kill them and immediately put their Lord Soul into a chosen undead. But if a vampire dies a lot, they start losing their memory, to the point of basically completely losing their minds. That's not what turns them hollow, though. They don't need to eat nor drink anymore, but if they don't drink human blood, they go hollow. Eventually, most vampires, well, first of all, they forgot who they were, or turned hollow, because, with most real people dead or turned into vampires, there's basically nowhere near enough blood to sustain their population. I'm not gonna spoil the rest of the story, but yeah, the city is isolated from the rest of the world. It's filled with hollows and crazed, bloodthirsty vampires, basically. There are three main anomalies in this universe. Bonfires, the Demon Soul's fog isolating the city from the rest of the world, and the rare white trees of Gondor that bear Christmas tree toys filled with artificial blood for vampires to munch on. It's the only thing other than human blood that can sustain a vampire. Nobody knows why and how, they just exist now. So the story is that all these trees come from the same root system, and you start following the roots to the source, allegedly, hoping to figure out what's going on and maybe even end this nightmare somehow. While a cast of complete losers bitch your ear off about how you should feel bad for them and pay attention to their and only their emotional struggles of not being hugged enough. Eventually, you make your way into the city of Honor Londo, where they literally explain the entire story to you. At any point early in the game, you essentially have no idea why things are the way they are. And it turns out that the story is actually a bit more complex than you thought, and is actually even kind of interesting. You need to make it to that point though. If you stop playing before getting to the end of Honor Londo, you lose out on all of the story. Unfortunately, unlike most PC games these days, the European PS4 version of Code Vein doesn't allow to change the language to Japanese. You can switch to Japanese voices, but that's only 50% of what I want to do. Also, you can't rebind menu controls, aka change circle and cross places, for menus. Which is kind of a normal thing, but Code Vein is a relatively recent game, so I was hoping, maybe. So yeah, I'm trading in my version as soon as I'm done with it, which is probably happening relatively soon, and I will be getting myself a Japanese version at some point if I'm still alive in like a few years and want to play Code Vein again. However, after playing with original VO and English localized text, now I at least know a thing or two about the quality of localization here, for what it's worth. The localization is crap, as always. It is very annoying to hear one thing and then read something absolutely different in subtitles. So if you speak Japanese, definitely go for a Japanese copy. It'll be more enjoyable, trust me. I myself got an English version because it was easier to get, obviously, but I wasn't really thinking much about, am I compromising my experience? I wasn't really thinking much about it because A, I didn't 100% know there wasn't the option to switch the language properly, and B, I didn't know there was so much story. Any other Souls-like, you can literally play in any language. It really doesn't affect your experience almost at all. Code Vein is a different story though. I didn't know it, but now you do. You're welcome. I might repeat it at the end of the video as part of general summary, but the story is not half bad. It is actually pretty interesting. The cutscenes are well directed and nicely scored. It's just that the method of delivery sucks, with all the exposition dumps and constant characters bitching about how important their small stupid problems are. However, you can literally skip all of it. Just saying. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I skipped a lot of stuff after the half point of the game, where they literally explain the entire story to you. It's literally the plot of Dark Souls 1, by the way, combined with a little bit of Dark 2, which is, again, basically the same story as Dark 1. I skipped a lot because the rest of the story between that point and the ending is basically nothing but even more characters' backgrounds, and I don't care, sorry. I don't care about these selfish, overacting, overly dramatic people with their stupid, hammy, and unrealistic cliché family dramas and whatnot. The fucking Mia's little brother plot, oh. And right after that, Yakumo gets even more screen time, as the plot is not even about him. And then that stupid love story between the two characters who weren't even in the game until the story makes itself all about their sick and healthy relationship that will never work, by the way. Nope, sorry, I partially checked out at some point. Only partially, mind you, because some truly interesting things were happening sorta at the same time, but I'm not gonna spoil those. Just know that, yeah, unfortunately, the story does outstay its welcome a little bit. Or rather, at some point it runs out of interesting things to say, but it doesn't stop, and instead keeps on talking about some made-up fillers. I'm actually very glad I wasn't streaming the second half of the game, because boy oh boy, me skipping most of its filler cutscenes and walking segments would have pissed some people off for sure. How dare I, right? Ooh. Well, I do, because most of it, past the half point, sucks. Also, all the skipping would have made me act pretty salty, I guess, and that's not the kind of stream that is fun to run or watch. Character design is a mixed bag of completely normal and pretty idiotic. The game kind of intentionally compromises its ability to be taken seriously. Probably because, hey guys, we need to be more over-the-top anime so that we could be more easily recognized as anime, because Namco Bandai wants this to be a product for weebs, and then if we have time left, we'll add some video game to it. Then you see characters like the guy without depth perception, Eva, and even Io. It becomes pretty obvious the devs barely take their own characters seriously, really. Why should you, then? Overall, I think all combined, the characters are tolerable. While, yeah, most of them are basically as anime cliche as it goes and often very annoying. Well, what did you expect? This game was made by the developer that specializes in making their games as over-the-top anime as possible so that weebs buy them, thinking this is Japanese pop culture. Spoilers, it's not, it's marketing, the one aimed at the lowest common denominator. The overall visual style of the game is very basic, pretty low fidelity and not extremely imaginative, but to my own surprise, I found it plenty interesting. Something is extremely right about it, I can't quite put my finger on it. I reckon world design has a lot to do with it, but right now I am only talking about visual design. For comparison, this world is infinitely more intriguing than the one of Dark Souls 3 or like 80% of Nioh levels. It does look kind of like God Eater, unfortunately, i.e., generic and kind of boring, but somehow it just doesn't feel generic and boring. So graphics and performance, well, it's God Eater graphics. Characters look alright, but the world looks like a PS Vita game upscaled to 1080p. It mostly does, because the game is obviously made of all the same assets that, all the God Eater games are being made of ever since God Eater 2 on PS Vita. The hub looks good though. The rest of the world, yeah, it looks like an HD remaster of a Vita game. That being said, it doesn't look bad. It's crisp, the image is clear of lens flare, blur, bloom, chromatic aberration-based AA, blur-based AA, and other garbage often plaguing our video games. The camera is very responsive, the FOV is totally acceptable, Code Vein doesn't hurt to look at all. It totally conveys its artistic intent, and it's all of that, it's already more than a lot of games provide these days, so I say the graphics are more than okay. Even being kinda handheld, I think they're fine. Also, it's Unreal Engine, so get ready for some texture load-in. Additionally, one of the first things to happen after I've updated the game was a crash, before which I played the vanilla version for about 5 hours. So yeah, maybe don't bother updating it if you're on a console and usually don't have it connected to the interwebs. The patch, I don't know, I think it fixes nothing. It just basically, pre-downloads the DLC and some cosmetic stuff. You probably need to buy a DLC to access or like get a microtransaction or something, I don't know. Performance aims at 60 FPS and on PS4 Pro hits at about 60% of the time. I'd say the frame rate dips to 50s, 30s, 40s, 20s, you name it. I can't call it very stable. It happens way too often. And sometimes randomly too, but mostly when you physically walk from one location to the other. In fact, during those transition segments, the game lags so bad it's borderline insulting. When frame rate isn't skipping, however, it's beautiful 60 FPS. Also, the game does the Bloodborne thing when it occasionally sends a horde of enemies your way, and when they're all on the screen at once, it cuts the amount of frames of their animation by like 80%. I guess they just copied the solution from Bloodborne and said, what's good enough for Bloodborne is good enough for us. Never mind the fact that no one likes the performance side of Bloodborne. Well, actually, Code Vein is 60 FPS, so yeah, unlike it FromSoft, I guess, over at Shift, some people do understand a thing or two about how a game should run, at least. Well, at least they tried. Another thing reminding me of Bloodborne is load times. Well, the game does load a bit faster than 60 seconds, dear vanilla Bloodborne on standard PS4, but Code Vein has like 5 times as much load screens, I would say. There is a load screen before each cutscene, after each cutscene. It's a mess. completely ruins boss cutscenes, by the way. You know, you have your boss introduction, the music ramps up, it should transition into the fight, and instead it cuts to a silent load screen with some random sound effects stuck in a 1-second loop. Yeah, there are lots of interesting things in Code Vein, but polish is not one of them. A few words on level design. From here on, I'll be comparing the game to Nioh a lot, since it is literally the only other non-FromSoft Souls-like worth playing. Level design, even though completely linear, feels much better than Nioh because the world is actually open and connected. Linearly, end of one zone to the beginning of the next one, but still connected, Dark 3 kind of deal. And the game is not just a, series of small standalone levels. It never feels like you're going through chalice dungeons, aka like 80 to 85% of Nioh. The game does have chalice dungeons, by the way. They ain't particularly the greatest, but also very short, optional, and luckily the main game has nothing in common with them in terms of level design. There are some, okay, a lot, Soul-style shortcuts that loop back either straight to the last bonfire or just like a previous part of the level, but the game is not obsessed with them like Nioh, which is a good thing, because instead levels are mostly linear, but with a lot of interesting optional parts like to explore and things to find, which level design wise, but also visually, makes Code Vein way more interesting to go through than Nioh. In fact, unlike in Nioh, here the process is barely tedious and boring at all. Who would have thought it was possible, huh? I would still say the levels are pretty unimaginative, but somehow it all comes together in an enjoyable package, as an enjoyable experience. That is something, again, to mention, Nioh couldn't achieve even with, well, technically more interesting aesthetics. So finally, combat system. Surprisingly, I don't have much to say about it. It's competent, it does its function, but that's about it. Combined with good exploration, interesting class and abilities system, okay-ish story, good music, the overall package works. Barely scraping by at times if you're only considering combat system. Really not something you're gonna be replaying the game over and over again for. But no, sorry, I can't say the combat is bad. It's not even really all that good, it's just okay, but if you think not good but okay translates into bad, you wanna know bad? Play The Slurge or Schlongs of the Baller. Code Vein, 100% different category, it has nothing in common with other crap like that. On top of that, if things were reversed and the combat was stellar, but everything else sucked, you would have gotten yourself a what? You would have gotten yourself a Nioh, and we all know that is not a way to, make an interesting game. Even if your combat is absolutely brilliant, if literally everything else sucks, your game sucks. So I am perfectly happy with the combat being okay to good, and actually the whole game being exactly that. Trust me, it's way more enjoyable to play an okay game than a bad game with technically good combat. The best way to describe combat is Dark 2. It's floaty, animations don't have much weight to them, enemies don't really react much to being damaged. Enemy placement, also Dark 2 all over again. Enemies are mostly waiting for you patiently behind near completely blind corners. Just like in Dark 2, magic feels unexpectedly good. You have a useless block, and a dedicated parry button you are guaranteed to forget about. Backstabbing in theory works just like in Demons or Dark 1. In practice it works like crap, but it does work. Enemies home in on you like crazy. Pretty much all of them are on turntables. Again, just like in Dark 2. If you know what the turntable problem of Dark 2 was, it's here also. Also, most enemies' attacks are ridiculously wide, like 250 degrees. So have fun treating this combat seriously. I recommend cheese. You heal like in Dark 1, Fast and Furious. Estus upgrades work just like in Dark 2. You cannot manually aim ranged weapons. The overall selection of weapons, by the way, is, well, it's okay. A lot of weapons are extremely similar, unfortunately, to the point where it's really hard to get, like, what is the difference between some of them, really. Makes like picking your main weapon unintentionally confusing somewhere close to beginning of the game. But then you're fine. At least there ain't like literally 5 of them, like say in Nioh. Magic works kind of like in Demons, technically. You have a magic bar. Also Bloodborne, pretty much the same way, right? Actually, yeah, it's closer to Bloodborne, now that I think of it. You do have a magic bar, but it's represented with, like, digits instead of, like, an actual bar, you know? Just like in Dark 2, the sooner you forget about technically existent poise, the better. The poise, yeah, forget about it. What else is there? Am I missing something? Oh, there is an optional NPC summon. I did mention it previously, but didn't really explain maybe. There's an optional NPC summon you can have running with you always. They can be a bit dumb, but overall are very useful. Even too useful, I think. They are essentially easy mode. But then without them, in certain moments, the game becomes ultra hard. So pick your poison. Movement is a bit floaty as well, even more so than in God Eaters, I think. But unlike in Dark 2, which is also very floaty, obviously, you know, in this game you can move in any direction. In Dark 2, as you might remember, you only move in 8 directions, keyboard style. Here, it's obviously 360 degrees. Any direction you want. Yeah, cool, right? In Code Vein, the floatiness comes from the default running animation being not very in sync with the actual movement speed, I think. It kind of looks like your character is not moving fast enough. It kind of looks like they're running in place a little bit. I don't know how else to describe it, but yeah, it definitely feels a bit floaty, but you, in fact, get used to it. However, sprinting animation is pretty on point. So I'm just, yeah, running and sprinting is not the same thing. Running feels a bit floaty, sprinting is totally fine. In one area of combat, Code Vein is for reals better than Nioh, enemy variety. However, that's not saying much because Nioh had like, what, 6 enemies? Boss fights, yeah, Nioh takes the cake. Code Vein in that area is just like the overall combat. It's like an offensive, but barely much better than just okay. Oh, and a few words about the UI. The menus are fine, good even, but the HUD is simply stupid. You get used to it, but there's definitely some adaptation period. Well, it's impossible to keep an eye on your stamina bar because it's in the lower left corner next to the health bar that is for some reason thicker than it, and the stamina bar itself is white, which really doesn't stand out against the graphics at all. And the whole thing is in the lower left corner, not the upper one, which is not just a question of style, it's a question of doing it right or wrong. And your magic bar, by the way, is in a whole other corner. No other game does that. What the hell? I don't know. Sorry, I don't get it. Hot caca design. Oh, and maybe while we're at it, character customization. It's pretty good, but I don't know what was all that craze about Code Vein having like the best character edited ever. Woo. No, you guys are idiots. It's actually very limiting, and I mean, it looks nice, but it's pretty basic. Yes, whatever you do ends up looking good, that's the intention behind it. You know, it's kind of like MMO character creation. You can't really create an ugly character. In terms of actual customization, there's nothing special about Code Vein's editor. Freedom Wars or God Eater 2, basically the same thing. You guys need to chill and play more video games. If Code Vein is literally your first one or something, I understand that everyone is a game reviewer nowadays and you want to participate in discussion, but still, please, do everything you can to refrain from stating things like best ever or worst ever or of all time when talking about video games. Thank you. Unlike all the Souls and Souls-like games that I can think of, you wear only one piece of armor, like the entire costume at once. Well, actually, it's not a costume, it is something that you wear essentially over your clothing, so it can be considered like an actual armor. It's called veil, the things that you can wear. And instead of rings, you have passive skills, maximum of 4 at a time. Skills here are called gifts and, you know, can be passive, so they are essentially just like rings from the Souls games. And active gifts will function just like magic in Demons or Dark 3, i.e. you have like a magic bar to use them. But among them, you also have special melee moves that are also just like basically your regular gifts. And the melee moves, they consume magic but work kind of like weapon arts from Dark 3. There are tons of classes in the game. The classes here are called blood codes, I think. And every class comes with their own available gifts. You buy gifts with souls, and in order to unlock the ability to buy, well, most of them, you first need to unlock the right to do so. You can switch between classes at will, like anytime. And the reason you're going to be doing a lot of switching, even if you don't like most of the classes, is because most of them will have at least a few, well, at least one, I guess, like interesting gifts, passive or active. After you play as a certain class a little bit with the gifts you're interested in equipped, you master those gifts, after which you can equip them for any other class. That's, I don't know, I think they call it like inheriting. I guess the mastering and inheriting is essentially the same thing. But basically, yeah, you master those gifts and you can equip them for other classes. I quite like this system. Unfortunately, the game kind of undermines it after you play for about 10 hours, I would say, because you quickly start drowning in the items allowing to instantly master a gift. Nevertheless, I like this part of the game a lot. It provides you with the feeling of actually working on assembling your own unique build, like going through a process of getting it together. And it just generally forces you to try different loadouts, often creating additional challenge, by the way. It kind of, forces you out of your super overpowered build, at least from time to time. Gives you a different set of tools. I think it's cool. And you get a reward after playing like that for some time, right? You get some new gifts that can be equipped for any other class. You get more options. I think it makes the game more interesting. I don't know about you, but yeah, I kinda like that part of the game a lot. Also, you don't really choose what stats to upgrade when you level up. Your stats depend on your class and choice of armor. When you level up, you literally just gain levels, and your level applies to all the classes. So there is no way you can ruin a character by investing into a stat you later find out you don't need. And another thing, when you buy new gifts for new classes, for some of the more like big and important classes, you cannot master their last gift. Can only be used with the respective class. You can tell if a gift cannot be mastered and inherited by other classes if it's an active gift, never passive, and it doesn't have any stat requirement. If an active gift doesn't have any stat requirements, it's a sign that you won't be able to master it and use with other classes. It's just something I discovered on my own. The game doesn't tell you that. That's it, really. Overall, I enjoyed Code Vein. Even kind of a lot. Even though I don't think it's especially good, it's way more fun than Neo, that technically plays much better, or Dark 3, that plays alright, but at the same time it's one of the most depressing things to experience for an old fan of the series. If you like the Souls series and by now are pretty sick of replaying the same couple games over and over again, Code Vein is definitely something you should check out. For everyone else, I don't know, I can't say the game particularly exceeds at anything else, but then I don't know your tastes in like visual style and storytelling. Maybe this is for you? If you want more God Eater, you should just get Freedom Wars. Actually, you should get Freedom Wars in any scenario. Thank you so very much for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. This was not a short video by any means. More likely than not, I'll be back with some more complaining. Hopefully at some point I'll learn how to be brief.